Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The night should have been ordinary. Just 4 adults sharing drinks, old stories, and the kind of laughter that fills a quiet living room after midnight. But sometimes the smallest moments shift everything. A look held half a second too long. A hand brushing against another that doesn't pull away quickly enough. A silence that grows heavier than the conversation meant to cover it. I remember leaning over the back of the sofa watching the amber glow of the lamp spill across the room. My husband sat there with his best friend, the two of them laughing about something from years ago, their voices blended with the soft music playing somewhere in the background. On the surface everything looked normal, comfortable, even. But beneath it something restless stirred in the air, something none of us were willing to name out loud. It started with a glance. His friend looked at me in a way that made the room feel smaller. Not inappropriate, not obvious, just curious. Like he was trying to read something in my expression that no one else noticed. I told myself it meant nothing. People look at each other all the time, yet the moment lingered long after it passed, like the echo of a song you can't stop hearing. Across the sofa my husband noticed it too. He didn't say anything. He simply leaned back, watching the room with that thoughtful expression I'd come to recognize over the years. The kind of look he wore when he was trying to understand a situation before reacting to it. Our eyes met for a brief second. There was something strange in that look. Not anger, not jealousy, something far more complicated. Maybe curiosity, maybe challenge. The tension grew quietly from there. His friend's wife joined us with another round of drinks, her laughter bright and confident. She sat beside my husband, close enough that their shoulders brushed now and then. It could have been accidental, but every time it happened I noticed the way she didn't rush to move away. 4 people in one room, 4 people pretending nothing unusual was happening. Yet every small movement carried meaning. A glass handed over with fingers touching for a moment longer than necessary. A whispered comment that made someone smile just a little too privately. The kind of subtle shifts that transform a simple evening into something unpredictable. I could feel it building, the quiet awareness that each of us had started noticing the others differently. Not as friends, not exactly as strangers either, something in between. Outside the night pressed softly against the windows, the city lights flickering like distant signals in the darkness. Inside the atmosphere felt warmer, heavier. Conversations slowed, pauses stretched longer. No one wanted to be the first to acknowledge the strange gravity pulling us closer together. My husband stood up eventually, walking toward the window with his drink in hand. His best friend followed a moment later. For a second their silhouettes blended against the glass while the two of them talked in low voices. Behind them his wife and I remained by the sofa. She looked at me with a knowing smile, not cruel, not mocking, just aware. "Funny how nights like this happen," she murmured softly. I didn't answer. Because in that moment as I watched the 2 men across the room and felt the charged quiet surrounding all 4 of us, one thing became painfully clear. Something had already begun between us, and none of us were pretending otherwise anymore. The real question wasn't whether the night would change things. It was how far we were all willing to let it go. The real question wasn't whether the night would change things. It was how far we were all willing to let it go. For a moment no one spoke. The quiet in the living room felt thicker now, almost alive. The soft music drifting from the speaker had faded into the background, leaving only the gentle hum of the city outside and the occasional clink of glass as someone adjusted their drink. I noticed my husband first. He stood by the window, shoulders relaxed but his posture slightly tense, like a man aware that something important was unfolding but unsure whether to step toward it or away. His best friend leaned beside him saying something quietly that made them both laugh under their breath. But even as they spoke both of them kept glancing back toward the sofa, toward us. The woman beside me swirled the wine in her glass slowly, the deep red catching the warm light of the lamp. Her expression carried the same calm confidence as before, yet there was something new in her eyes, curiosity mixed with something a little more daring. "You ever notice," she said softly, "how certain nights feel different from the moment they start?" I let out a quiet breath, watching the reflections dancing across the glass table. "Different how?" I asked. She tilted her head slightly, studying me like someone piecing together a puzzle. "Like everyone's pretending things are simple," she said, "when they're really not." Her words lingered between us. Across the room my husband turned slightly, resting his elbow against the window frame. His gaze met mine again, and for a second the entire room seemed to shrink down to just that silent connection. There was no accusation there, no warning, just awareness. The kind that made my pulse quicken without understanding why. His best friend noticed the look too. When his eyes shifted toward me, the corner of his mouth curved into the faintest smile, subtle enough that someone else might have missed it entirely, but I didn't. It felt like a quiet challenge, or maybe an invitation. He stepped away from the window a moment later, walking back toward the sofa with a casual confidence that didn't quite hide the tension in the room. When he reached the coffee table, he set his glass down and leaned forward slightly. "Refill?" he asked, gesturing toward my half-empty glass. Our fingers brushed when I handed it to him. It was a small touch, accidental, technically, but neither of us moved away right away. Something about the moment held us there, that brief electric pause where both people realized they felt the same spark. He cleared his throat softly, finally stepping back toward the kitchen counter where the bottles waited. Behind him, my husband watched everything, not closely enough to seem suspicious, but not casually either. His friend's wife noticed it too. I could tell by the way she shifted slightly closer to him near the window, her shoulder brushing his arm again. This time he didn't move away. Instead he said something that made her laugh, a low, warm sound that carried across the room. When his friend returned with the drink, he handed it back to me with a quiet nod. "Careful," he murmured lightly. "These are stronger than they taste." Our eyes met again, and this time the silence between us felt far more dangerous. Not because anything had happened, but because all four of us now understood the same thing. Something had shifted in the room, something subtle, something impossible to ignore. And if the night continued the way it was going, none of us were going to walk away from it unchanged. The room had grown quieter, if that was even possible. The soft hum of the city outside felt distant now, like it belonged to another world, while inside, tension draped itself over every surface. Every glance, every subtle movement, seemed charged with meaning that no one dared voice aloud. I found myself watching him again, his best friend, as he casually leaned against the edge of the sofa, not so casually that it looked like he didn't notice me, but with a careful restraint that made the space between us almost unbearable. The way his eyes followed mine for a fraction longer than necessary sent warmth creeping up my spine. Yet even as desire stirred, something kept me from closing the distance. Something invisible yet unmistakably real, like a wall I hadn't noticed before. He reached out for the book on the coffee table, his hand brushing mine in the process. My fingers tingled where they met, lingering just a moment too long. Neither of us pulled away immediately, though both of us knew we should. The contact was electric, a spark that demanded acknowledgement. And yet the pullback was equally strong, not from disinterest but from the weight of the moment, the unspoken rules and lines none of us were willing to cross. Not yet. Across the room, my husband and his wife sat near the window. I could feel the subtle shift of energy when they laughed quietly together, their connection a mirror of ours. It was almost comforting, almost grounding. But it also reminded me of everything I couldn't risk saying, everything that made the tension so deliciously unbearable. I noticed the way my best friend's eyes lingered on me when he thought I wasn't looking, like he was trying to memorize the curve of my expression, the way my lips pressed together when I swallowed a sigh. And in that moment I realized we were both holding back, not because we lacked desire but because we felt it too fiercely, too completely. It was too dangerous to act on, yet impossible to ignore. He leaned slightly closer when reaching for the wine glass, and I could feel the brush of his sleeve against my arm. A shiver ran through me, not from cold but from recognition that we were teetering on the edge of something unspoken, something both terrifying and irresistible. I wanted to lean in, wanted to close the space between us, but a small voice in my mind whispered that even fleeting indulgence could change everything in ways we couldn't control, and maybe that's what made it so irresistible. I caught a glimpse of his expression, a flicker of longing quickly masked by a casual smile. He was as aware as I was that the night had shifted into a territory no one had planned to explore. Our fingers brushed again, barely enough to feel warmth, yet enough to make the world shrink to that small point of contact. Then, as if the tension had reached a limit, we both pulled back, not abruptly, not from fear, but from wanting it too much, from recognizing the fragile boundary that still existed between us. The air vibrated with what could have been said, with all the words and confessions trapped in a look, a sigh, a heartbeat. And just like that, the room returned to its semblance of normality. The city lights outside, the soft glow of the lamp, the distant hum of music, all unchanged. But we both knew that nothing would ever feel quite ordinary again. Something had been awakened between us, and no matter how carefully we moved, it wasn't going back to sleep. The room had contracted to the space between us. Every sound, the faint clink of a glass, the whisper of a sleeve brushing fabric, the distant hum of the city, felt magnified. It was as if the world had shrunk down to the small circle of light around the sofa, where two people were suddenly aware of each other in a way that transcended words. I could feel him before I saw him fully. A shift in the air, a weight pressing lightly on my chest. His gaze had found mine again, unflinching, intense, and the heat that rose between us was nearly tangible. I swallowed hard, aware of my own quickened heartbeat, and for a moment I imagined letting the world slip away, letting this quiet gravity pull us together. But even as the thought surfaced, a careful caution held me back. "You ever feel," he began softly, voice low, almost lost in the shadows, "like you're standing on the edge of something you can't go back from, The words hovered in the air, heavy with meaning. I felt them in my chest, in the tightening of my stomach, in the pulse that raced through my veins. My lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. It was enough that he had said it, enough that we had acknowledged it, even in the smallest, quietest way. I nodded, letting my gaze linger on his face. There was a raw vulnerability there, hidden beneath the calm confidence he usually carried. For a moment I thought I could see him unravel just enough for me to step closer, to bridge the distance we'd held for so long. He shifted slightly, leaning just a fraction closer, and I felt the warmth radiating off him like an invitation. Our fingers brushed again, just a whisper of contact over the edge of the sofa. It was fleeting, almost accidental, but the electricity that surged through that touch was undeniable. Neither of us moved away, though the tension built until it felt as if the entire room were holding its breath. I don't know why this feels so impossible, I whispered, voice trembling with the weight of what we both knew but refused to say outright. He didn't answer immediately. Instead his eyes softened, and for a brief instant, the subtle walls between us cracked. There was understanding there, acknowledgement, and a silent promise of something more. A fraction closer, a half step that could change everything, and yet we remained suspended, caught between restraint and surrender. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that twists inside your chest and presses your pulse against your skin. We leaned imperceptibly toward each other, aware of every shift of weight, every breath, every subtle brush of clothing that sent sparks crawling along nerves that had lain dormant for too long. Outside, the city lights shimmered, indifferent to the storm brewing in a small apartment. Inside, nothing moved but our eyes, our quiet breaths, our almost touching hands. And in that suspended silence, it felt as if time had paused, waiting for something, a confession, a surrender, a breaking point, to shatter the delicate tension. I knew the moment would come. I just didn't know which of us would reach for it first. And then in that endless quiet I realized it didn't matter. The electricity was already there. It had been there all along. All that remained was whether we could hold it, or whether it would finally consume us. The night finally surrendered to us. Rain tapped gently against the window, each drop a soft percussion that matched the rhythm of our quickened hearts. The lamp cast a warm golden glow across the room, pooling over the sofa and draping the space between us in intimacy. Shadows flickered across the walls as the rain shifted, painting the room with a quiet, cinematic heartbeat. I could feel him before I saw him fully, the way his presence had filled the space beside me until it was impossible to ignore. Our eyes met again, this time unguarded, heavy with the weight of nights spent skirting the edges of what we wanted. Every hesitation, every stolen glance, every brush of hands over the table had led to this. Her laugh from the other side of the room was distant, almost irrelevant now. The music a soft murmur under the storm outside. All that mattered was the electricity coiling in the small space between us. He leaned closer, just enough for the warmth of his body to reach mine, and I realized how every subtle touch, every near contact, had been preparing us for this. Her breath melted into his. Just a whisper, a promise we didn't need to articulate. Fingers traced paths along familiar curves, not in haste, but in reverence. An unspoken conversation carried entirely in the language of skin. Every pulse, every sigh, every quick intake of breath became a word, a confession, a surrender that no voice could ever capture. The city outside blurred in streaks of rain against the glass, but inside, time had stopped. Their bodies spoke the words they couldn't say, conveying a yearning that had been locked away for too long. There was no rush, no clamor, only a slow, deliberate unwrapping of emotion, an intimacy that felt more essential than anything else in the world. He tilted his head, brushing hair from my face in the gentlest of motions, a touch that carried both tenderness and hunger. I leaned just enough to meet it, feeling the warmth, the tension, the undeniable pull that had been simmering between us all night. Each breath shared, each heartbeat mirrored, was a thread weaving us closer, drawing us into a private orbit of connection. The rain intensified, drumming a soft rhythm on the roof that matched the pulse of the room. Shadows flickered across our faces, and in that play of light and dark, every emotion became visible. Desire, curiosity, love, longing, they all swirled together, a storm contained in a single room. No words were necessary, none could have captured the intensity of the moment. The air itself seemed charged with the energy we'd been denying, and when we finally let go, it was like a tide that had been building for years, a wave of heat, emotion, and breathtaking closeness. And yet even in that surrender there was elegance, a beauty in restraint. Every gesture, every subtle contact, every soft inhalation of breath was poetry in motion. The night held us, and in its embrace we finally understood. The fire wasn't about the act, it was about the connection, the longing, the exquisite perfection of finally allowing ourselves to feel it fully. The morning light seeped slowly through the curtains, soft and pale, brushing the living room in shades of gray and gold. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving the city washed clean, the streets glistening, and a fragile calm settling over the apartment. Inside, the air felt heavier, charged with the remnants of what had happened. A warmth, a tension, a quiet ache that lingered long after the night had ended. We sat across from each other, not touching, not speaking, yet aware of every small movement. The coffee table between us seemed to stretch impossibly wide, a barrier that was both physical and emotional. The warmth of yesterday, the closeness we had surrendered to, hung in the space like smoke, palpable yet untouchable. I stole glances at him, careful, tentative. There was a softness in his gaze now, but also a storm I couldn't read, a mixture of satisfaction, longing, and uncertainty. I wondered if he replayed the night as vividly as I did, or if the morning light had softened it, turned it into memory instead of living fire. He spoke first, low and careful, almost hesitant. "I don't know what this changes." I nodded, my fingers wrapped around my mug, tracing its rim like a lifeline. "I don't either," I admitted. "But I know it changed something." There was silence, but it wasn't empty. It hummed with the truth we both refused to name fully. Guilt mingled with relief, longing with fear. Were we lovers now, or simply two people who had found an escape from the edges of their lives? Was it love or was it survival? A craving for connection in a night that had demanded we drop our defenses. His hand twitched on the armrest, close enough that I wanted to reach across and take it, and yet far enough that restraint held me back. There was a rhythm to the quiet, a heartbeat we shared even without touching, a subtle acknowledgement of intimacy deeper than words. The city outside began to stir, the faint sounds of morning traffic filtering through the rain-cleaned streets. In that soft light I realized the night had peeled back layers we hadn't allowed anyone to see. Secrets, walls, and unspoken fears had softened, leaving only raw human connection. And then, just as we were finding a fragile balance in that silence, the doorbell rang. Both of us flinched slightly, the sudden sound piercing the stillness like a reminder of reality. Who could it be at this hour? My husband's work? A neighbor? When I opened the door, a familiar face stood there, someone neither of us expected. And in that moment the delicate thread of the night's intimacy seemed to shimmer even more, reminding us that the world outside didn't pause, that consequences and surprises awaited. Yet somehow, despite the unknown, the closeness between us felt indestructible, a quiet bond forged in fire and restraint. We exchanged a glance, one of understanding, of unspoken acknowledgement. The night had been ours, and the morning was ours too, in the way only moments that cut to the heart can truly be. And no matter what came next, the connection, now deeper than it had ever been, would remain, fragile, electric, and real. The days that followed were quiet, the kind of calm that feels almost fragile after a storm. The city outside carried on as usual, but inside we moved with a new awareness of each other, an unspoken understanding that something fundamental had shifted. We no longer needed words to acknowledge the closeness, the uncharted territory we had navigated together. Some mornings we would catch each other's gaze across a room, a smile barely touching our lips, and in that instant the memory of the night we let go pulsed softly between us. It wasn't loud or urgent anymore. It was quiet, steady, like a flame that refused to die, warming without consuming. One afternoon I found myself seated across from him with nothing but the light filtering through the window and the hum of a distant city. Our hands brushed accidentally over a book, a cup, the small things we used to call coincidences. This time though the brush held meaning, and we lingered just long enough to feel it, the reminder that we had been brave enough to feel fully, to open ourselves without fear. He leaned slightly, resting his forehead against mine in a gesture so simple it carried the weight of 1,000 confessions. I closed my eyes, letting the calm seep into my chest, letting my heartbeat slow beside his. The tension of the night, the longing, the silent conversations of skin and breath, all of it settled into a quiet warmth. No grand declarations, no sudden resolutions, just the profound, intimate certainty that we had touched something rare, something lasting. Sometimes our paths diverged, and sometimes they converged, but the memory of our connection lingered like the soft perfume of a flower that refuses to fade. Every glance, every shared silence, became a private reminder of what we had discovered in each other. Desire tempered by understanding, passion tempered by respect, intimacy elevated by care. We didn't need to label it, we didn't need to define it. The night had given us a language of its own, one that carried forward into mornings, afternoons, and quiet evenings. It was in the pause before a laugh, the shared warmth and a gentle touch, the comfort of simply being near, and in that slow, deliberate closeness we found peace. Not the loud, obvious kind, the one the world expects, but the deep, quiet kind that wraps around your chest like a soft blanket, leaving goosebumps where the heart has learned to breathe freely. When the moment came to part, even briefly, it was with a gentle acknowledgement, a brush of lips on foreheads, a lingering hold of hands. We walked away with the same weight in our chests, a mixture of longing and gratitude, memory and quiet contentment. The night we shared would live on in us, always, not as regret, not as guilt, but as something beautiful and unshakable. something that reminded us of how raw human and exquisite connection could be, fleeting, electric and unforgettable.